So the question on every 13 and 14-year-old's mind, does smoking weed make you skate better? So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my experience of smoking weed, which I did chronically for 8 years, from about 14 till 22. And I'm going to share this experience in hopes that it will help shed some light on this interesting and confusing question. Because once you start looking online and reading things, you will get every view under the sun. So my attempt is to hope clarify a few things by giving my experience. Now, I am only one person, and this is how it affected me. Everyone is different. I first started smoking weed around 14. I think the reason I started is because it was the rebellious thing to do, and I was what I felt like was kind of a bad and rebellious kid. So my first few times smoking it, I mean, it knocked me out. Like, that stuff was strong even back then, and this is 20 years ago. In my first encounters with it, there was no way I could skateboard, and it stayed like this for about a year. I would smoke it intermittently whenever the group I was with had it, and I could never skateboard after smoking it. Also, in the early stages of using it, because it was so strong, it was fairly psychedelic, and it also made me pretty paranoid. I used to get these kind of recurring visions in my mind that I was sitting under a desk and it was crushing me in my waist. I think that may have been a little bit of my subconscious coming out, because I really hated school, guys. Like, it was prison to me. So around when I was 15, we moved to Victoria. And moving from Vancouver to Victoria, there was nothing to skate. Like, Vancouver had everything. Ledges, stairs, downtown, everything. Victoria had nothing. It had a crappy park and the occasional home-built box or rail. So upon moving to Victoria, I was actually quite depressed, and I still hated school as much as ever. And smoking weed was really popular in the circles I was in. So naturally, I gravitated towards it once again. As I began to smoke it more regularly, the feelings of paranoia started to go away, and I would start to actually enjoy myself occasionally. Otherwise, why would I continue doing it? Still, at this stage, around 15, I couldn't usually skateboard while I was smoking pot. However, I did become quite chronic, and I think a dependency started around 15. By 16, I wasn't even actually skateboarding as much. I spent most of my time hanging out with the smokers, selling weed, trying to make a little bit of money, but of course I always smoked my profits. So at this point, I was smoking weed every single day. I didn't usually get very paranoid, however, I was very antisocial from it. You know, you pretty much sit on the couch not being able to say anything except, "I'm so baked." That was the extent of it, that and eating. However, at this stage, when I became chronic, I was able to skateboard under the influence. Now, looking back honestly at it, I'm sure I could have skated much better had I been living an active and healthy lifestyle. But because I was in a lot of pain from the pressures of school, my parents, and just generally being somewhere new and not knowing everybody, I really felt the need to numb out, and that's what I did every day. So I smoked pot to numb out. I did it to not feel anything. I wouldn't even say that it necessarily made me happy, it just made me not feel. So basically from 17 onwards, I smoked it chronically. I would say I skateboarded under the influence far more than I ever skated without smoking it. At this point, I became unable to skateboard without it. And the reason for this is because I had, at that point, a psychological dependence. Marijuana is not physically dependent. It's not like heroin. You're not going to crap your pants and puke and sweat all over the place if you don't get it. However, if you are addicted to marijuana and you stop using it, what's going to happen is you're going to become irritable. You're not going to be able to concentrate. You're not going to be able to focus on the things you want to do. And really, I didn't actually want to do anything other than smoke weed, skateboard, and eat. So I only had about 3 interests in life. That and girls, but I was too antisocial from smoking pot to ever be able to speak to them, which is where alcohol came in, but that's a whole other subject. So my dependency began at 15, became chronic, and then from about 16 to 22, I was doing it every day, and I actually couldn't skateboard without it. So one could logically deduce from this, hey, Ben smokes pot all the time, and he skates awesome. Because those were my peak years, I was doing well, not to toot my own horn. But if you look at it from another angle, Of course I was skating well. I had a certain amount of talent and I was skateboarding every single day. I didn't even go to school, I just skipped school all the time. So it's only natural that I would progress at something, and skateboarding was the one thing I did every day. Other than smoke pot, of course. Do kids even call it pot anymore? Or is that like how my dad used to say, "You kids smoking dope"? Like, what do you guys even call it now? Is weed still normal? Am I getting by okay? Anyways, moving on. So you hear a lot of people saying things like, it helps me focus, it helps me relax. And I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth or categorize anybody into certain stages of addiction. However, I would say those sorts of phrases are likely often coming from people who are already psychologically dependent on it, who already cannot skateboard without it because they are too irritable, unfocused, and just generally unstimulated. So on a side note a little bit, here is my dependence these days. And if I don't drink coffee, I get depressed, I get irritable, and I can't concentrate. So it's funny how we can switch one thing for the other, but at least this one's actually stimulating. Weed, cannabis, pot, whatever the heck you want to call it, is well known to decrease hand-eye coordination, decrease focus, decrease energy. So let's just look at that scientifically. Like, how is that actually supposed to help you skateboard? Based on my own experience, and I can't say this for anybody else, and I know there's going to be a lot of other experiences, but based on my experience, initially it did not help me skateboard. When I became dependent, then I couldn't skateboard without it. And now I quit everything at 22. I have been completely clean and sober since 22, so I'm 35, that's 13 years. I would say my life dramatically improved from that point. I went from being a man-child to all of a sudden having an adult life. Maybe you don't want an adult life anyways. I mean, it's pretty stressful. Like, I have a lot of pressure these days. That's probably why I drink so much of this. So to summarize, if you have every intention of developing a habit with pot, then it's probably a good idea to smoke it all the time so that you become dependent so you can't skateboard without it. And then in which case you can say, smoking weed helps me skateboard. But I think if we look at it from just a logical point of view, I don't see any benefit. If you're at the young impressionable age of around 13 and 14 and you're considering starting smoking because you're seeing so many pros on the internet smoking weed and drinking and living that lifestyle, I think you should seriously reconsider what kind of a life you want to have. And I think you should seriously look at what kind of life people who chronically smoke pot and drink alcohol and these sorts of activities have by the time they get to 30, 40, 50. It can be really hard to have that kind of bird's eye view of your life. But back when I was a young impressionable teen, around 13, 14, all I was seeing was guys like Tom Penny, Chad Muska. I looked up to these guys and they were smoking pot all the time, and it was really obvious in all the media surrounding it. And I wish that at that young impressionable age there was another voice, another person who was credible, who I could see clearly had their stuff together, that was saying, why don't you reconsider this? Why don't you think about your life's goals and see if this is going to fit into it? Where do you want to be in 10, 20, 30 years? Will this help or will it hinder? So this video really isn't for the people who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s smoking weed and it's been a nice, long, useful habit for them. This video is for the young, impressionable kid who is wondering if they should try this. And to those who have a full and healthy marijuana habit and you've actually struggled through this entire video, I want you to know I have no judgment of it. I did it for 8 years. I didn't quit and get onto a high horse. I just simply now have 2 vantage points. I remember being severely dependent on it, and I know what it's like to live without it. And every day I wake up and I make the choice to live without drugs and alcohol because it's treated me really well. So thanks for watching. I hope you're not too alienated. And if you like this video, great. And even better, share.